quick backstory so we can get into it. Until I was about 10, I lived in a small apartment with my mother, aunt, older brother, and cousin. I knew back then, even as a small girl, that the apartment we lived in was some sort of gateway to hell. Things that go bump in the night is an understatement, because I can sit here all day and write about the absolute horror show that was my childhood home. I was plagued by these entities, but this story is about this one particular entity, who I'll call the Laughing Man. I was about 8 and wasn't feeling well. I was running a slight fever and wanted to sleep with my mother on the pull-out in the living room. My living room is set up so that the two couches face each other, one being the pull-out. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and sitting up while rubbing my eyes. I looked across at the other couch, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw a figure sitting and staring at me. It was the shadow of a tall, dark man. I kept blinking my eyes, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. I didn't know if it was a trick of the light coming in from the window or whatever, and I knew it wasn't any of my family members as it was too tall and lengthy. As I registered what I was seeing, the fucking thing then proceeds to lift its arms up and point at me, shake and throw its head back as if it was laughing. I didn't hear it, but I knew what it was doing. I couldn't move. I couldn't yell. I was frozen in absolute fear for what seemed like an eternity. When I could finally move again, I threw the covers over my head and tried to wake up my mother, who was laying right next to me. She wouldn't wake. I don't remember how the hell I fell back to sleep, but I think I must have passed out from fear. My night of horrors wasn't over, because till this day, I don't know if the next event was a dream or it was something I experienced in real time. It felt 100% real at the time, but it couldn't be. I remember waking up again and seeing a beautiful table laid out with white cloth, china, and silverware. It was completely engulfed in flames, right next to where my mother slept. I tried to shake my mother awake to tell her there was a fire, but she wasn't waking. I cried and screamed for her to wake up. I was choking on smoke, and the next thing I remember, it's morning. I told my mother what happened over breakfast, and she chalked it up to a fever hallucination. She didn't really address it and ignored the whole thing, but I remember the look on her face, one of absolute fear. Time passed and I grew up. I moved out to live with my dad when I was 10, and I can say that I haven't experienced anything paranormal since Gateway to Hell House. Fast forward to today, my mother and I didn't have a good relationship once I left to my dad's, and we've been trying to mend it recently. We got to chatting about old ghostly experiences, and I mentioned the Laughing Man. She then says she remembers, and that the man who I saw that night died in that apartment. Apparently back when they moved in, their father, my grandfather, was in desperate search for an apartment because they were basically homeless. When he went to see the apartment, it was completely gutted and being renovated. The landlord said there was a fire, but didn't mention anything about deaths. Once they moved in, the neighbors got to talking about what really happened. 3 people died in that fire. The father fell asleep with a lit cigarette on the couch, and the house set ablaze. Another resident died in a room, and the daughter, who was about 16 or 17 at the time, threw herself out of the 10th-story window. In order to escape the flames. The house is set up so that the living room is right next to the front door. The fire starting sealed their fate. The man died right where I was sleeping, and the vision of the table I saw on the fire all made sense. Also, now that I think of it, I thought he was a shadow. I now know that it was his charred body pointing and laughing at me all those years ago. I've been doing my 1 hour of outdoor exercise at night because I find it most relaxing. My neighborhood is very quiet, and I'm lucky to live in a nice area which I've always considered super safe. I used to walk at night even before lockdown, because I live right next to a canal, so there are lots of nice paths that are super pretty at night when everything is all lit up by the moon. Anyway, I was walking last night and decided to go to the shop first because I was hungry and then detour back to my usual route along the canal. When I was walking, I heard two guys speaking super loudly in German. They looked around 30, pretty tall, and they had caps on, which I remember because they had matching designs, which I thought was funny. They started getting really close, and when I glanced back to look at them, they started jeering, so I knew they were looking at me, which kind of freaked me out, so I sped walked towards the shop, but I had to stop at the road. They caught up with me, but didn't stop for the lights to change, just walked across and went into the store I was headed for. So I shrugged off my hunger and decided to just go to the canal for my walk. I stopped thinking about the men soon after, chalking it up to me being a generally anxious person. I don't particularly like walking past strangers at night, and I'm self-conscious enough as it is without them talking to or about me. Anyway, I complete my walk and I'm headed back home. For the story to make sense, I need to describe where I was. On my right there is water itself. I'm stood on the path, and to my left there's a big drop that goes straight onto the main road. Next to that road there's a row of houses. There is a railway bridge in front of me. I have my earphones in and my music is pretty loud, but I think I hear someone shouting, so I take one earphone out and listen, but it's pretty silent apart from passing cars on the road below me. That's when I see two men heading towards the bridge, and I immediately recognize them as the two guys who had jeered at me before from their caps. I stop walking as my anxiety floods back and consider phoning somebody, because I irrationally think if I'm on the phone when they walk past me, they won't bother me. But despite the fact that I was standing there frozen for ages, nobody comes out from under the bridge. I wait, staring at the bridge for a while in complete confusion, because there's no way they could have just vanished. I could see through to the other side of the bridge, so I know they didn't turn round and walk away or anything, but they certainly hadn't walked through because no one passed me. After a few moments, I start to think I hallucinated them or something. So I started slowly walking towards the mouth of the bridge, and just as I'm about to step in, I see it, the shadow of one of the men cast across the wall. My blood literally ran cold as I realized what was going on. They were waiting for me at the other side of the bridge, but they must have hidden behind the abutment so I wouldn't see them. My mind went to a million different places, panicking about what they would do if I walked under that bridge. I was convinced they'd just follow me. If I stayed where I was and phoned for help, I was certain they'd come out to see what was going on, and I'd be trapped. I did the only thing I could think to do. I quietly ran to the fence that separated the canal path from the drop to the main road and climbed it. I waited for a couple of moments as the cars passed, but thankfully, I live in a quiet area so the road was soon empty. I managed to navigate myself so I could lower myself off the drop without A, making much noise, or B, hurting myself too much, and the moment my feet hit the road, I raced to the side where the houses were and sped walk down that path as fast as I could without making noise, only glancing back when I was nearing the end of the road. The men were still there next to the bridge. I could see they were looking through the bridge to see where I had gone to. I felt sick and terrified, but I made it home. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know who they were, or if they'll be there again tonight, but I do know I'm not going to be walking at night for a very long time. Strangers under the bridge? Let's not meet. I was 15 years old at the time and out to a weekend afternoon movie with my friend. We were really early, so we decided to take a look around at a nearby toy store to kill some time before the previews began. I was strolling absent-mindedly down an aisle by myself, looking at toys I felt far too old for, when I heard an odd whistle. If you've ever heard the iPhone notification chime, then you have an idea of the sound I heard. I thought nothing of it. Maybe it was someone's phone, and moved through the aisles, eventually meeting back up with my friend. We walked around a bit more, talking and laughing, and I heard that whistle once again. Being preoccupied with my conversation more than anything, I still didn't pay any mind. On our way out of the store, I heard the whistle for a third time, but much closer, practically right over my shoulder. I whipped around mid-sentence. A man stood there, grinning from ear to ear in a strangely sinister way. The smile didn't fully reach his eyes. He was a bit on the small side, scraggly with long hair tied back in a low ponytail. He had on a tattered black t-shirt which hung loosely over his thin frame, and a bulging black drawstring backpack. "Hi," he said, stretching his lips even wider around his contrastingly bright white teeth. As a teenage girl, I was no stranger to the attention of older men, but something about his persona and approach set me on edge. Still, I was taught to be polite. "Hi," I responded tentatively, taking a step backwards and away from his intense stare. "I've noticed you around the store and thought I can get your opinion on something." He unfurls a crumpled, stained copy of the toy store's weekly ad and pointedly stabs at the Barbie doll selection with his index finger. "See, I'm looking for the perfect doll for my niece, and I just have no idea which one to pick. What do you think?" He looks up and smiles, but his eyes are dark pools of nothingness, devoid of any real interest. "This one's nice," I say, pointing to a doll at random, hardly looking at the ad. "Whoa, thank you. I really appreciate that. Hey, has anyone ever told you how pretty you are? You must go to the gym often. What gym do you go to?" Taken aback by his abrupt stream of rehearsed-sounding pickup lines, I say thank you and force a laugh. I'm young, and so is my friend. Our inexperience and his strange approach keeps us frozen in place. His eyes bore only into mine, and his grin, wider still and deeply disconcerting, never fades from his face. "Hey, do you want to be friends? I'd like very much to be friends with you. You know what friends do? They take pictures together. Let's take a picture together since we're friends." He holds up a red flip phone with the front cover held together by a rubber band. He activates the front-facing camera, and before I could say anything, he leans into me, face uncomfortably close, and snaps the picture. He looks at it briefly, smiles, and pockets his phone. "There, now we're friends," he says matter-of-factly, and turns his gaze back to me. Oppressingly, stupidity in a horrified daze, I nod. "So, where are you from? Where are you going after this? What do you like to do?" My friend puts her hand on my arm, and I suddenly break from my stupor. "We have to go, my dad's waiting," I say, and we turn to go. My last glimpse of him is with his head cocked to the side, and that wide smile spread across his face. His eyes now flickering with something I can only recall as amusement. We turn our backs, and as soon as we get far enough away, we run. Fast forward to a year and a half later. I'm in my junior year of high school, and on the early morning city bus heading to my first class of the day. The bus is packed, and I squeeze my way into the back. Reaching out a hand to grab the poles, the bus brakes sharply. I hear a whistle close to my ear. When I hear it again, I adjust my earbuds in my ears. Why isn't that person answering their phone? A hand closes right above mine on the pole. It is too close, and our fingers brush, but the person holds their hand there almost intentionally. I move my hand and glance up and into this broad smile of the creepy man from the toy store. cold chills shoot down my spine, and I grip the pole even harder until my knuckles turn white. He tilts his head, still smiling his toothy grin, and says, "Hi, friend." The bus is so jam-packed there's nowhere else for me to go, so I turn my body as far away from him as possible, hoping that playing dumb would work in my favor and he would go away. He leans closer still and says, "Hi, do you remember me?" I shake my head no and lean as far away as I can in the tight space. He frowns and looks suddenly angry. "No, I know you. We've met before. We're friends." I shake my head again, looking down, pretending to be engrossed in my music player. Maybe if he didn't get a full look at my face, he might think he had me confused with someone else. "No, I have your picture," he says, and reaches into his drawstring bag, pulling out his red flip phone held together by frayed rubber bands. All the while, I'm thinking, if he sees me get off at the stop to my school, he'll know where I am every day, and can find me easily. But if I get off at a random stop before my school, he could get off with me, and I have nowhere else to go. He's still scrolling through his phone, and I'm imagining all the other girls' pictures he might have on there, when he asks, "So, what school do you go to?" I think about saying mind your own business, but remember his angry frown from before, and I give him the name of another school. It doesn't really make sense because this bus only goes past one high school, and not the one I told him, but he nods at this and says, "Hold on, I have your picture somewhere here. We're friends." The bus pulls up to my high school, and there's nothing else I can do but get off. While he's still preoccupied with his phone, I lose myself in the crowd and run all the way to school. I'm shivering when I get to my first period classroom, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I ask my boyfriend to take the bus with me every morning for the next few weeks, and I change up my routine going to and from, but I don't see him again. Until 2 years later, and I'm a sophomore in college. I'm taking the bus home alone after a late night out with friends when I hear a weird whistle. Enough time has passed that I don't feel much alarm and exit the bus at my stop. It is completely dark out and I am one of two people who got off. Then, from behind me I hear, "Hello there. Do you remember me?" I turn around and it's him again. It's hard to make out his features in the dark, but I instantly remember the tone of his voice. Recalling the whistle, the tilted head, and the wide toothy smile, I see what looks like a backpack strapped to the front of his chest. "No," I say, and I start walking faster, heart racing, wondering how fast I can run in these flip-flops. I hear him picking up speed behind me. I dare to glance back. I glimpse him starting to run after me, his hands in his backpack, digging around for something I don't want to know. He is angry now, smile gone, and he shouts at me, "So, you want to be that way?" I start running and I don't stop until I get home. So, to the whistling man with the backpack, no, I do not want to be your friend. Let's not meet again. So, I've been wanting to write this encounter out for a while now. Unfortunately, it has taken me a long time to even fully fathom and process the potential danger I was in the evening this story takes place. For background, I am a 22-year-old female who is attending university in a larger city 3 hours away from my hometown. Therefore, I was living alone at the time, with my closest relatives being hours away from me. I had just recently gotten out of a very abusive relationship, and honestly, I was extremely heartbroken and felt devastated. I had been living in my small one-bedroom apartment with said boyfriend for the past 2 years. After the tumultuous end of our relationship, he moved out, and I remained residing in this apartment. I'm only mentioning that detail because in some way, it plays into the reckless decisions I made on this evening. For further explanation, it was hard for me to go home to an empty apartment, and amplified and worsened the heartbreak I was feeling at the time. Anyways, onto the story. My friends had decided to take me to a hockey game to get me out of my house and potentially get my mind off the breakup. It was Friday night, and we had been consuming far amounts of alcohol during the progression of the hockey game. In the arena we were attending, there is also a casino. Following the game, we decided to head there for a few more alcoholic beverages. It was a busy night, and the line for the bar was lengthy. During the duration of the time I was patiently waiting for service, I began to speak to a group of 3 men, and foolishly exchanged numbers with one member of their group. My friends and I decided to call it a night following only one drink at the casino, due to the overwhelming amount of people crowding the area. We part ways, but instead of going to my home, I spontaneously decided to text the man I had previously exchanged contact information with. He responds, informing me that he and his friends had relocated to a nightclub in the area, and inviting me to join them to continue the night of drinking. I still regret almost every choice I made on this evening, but I booked an Uber to meet the group of men and headed in their direction. The night from there on consisted of large volumes of alcohol and dancing. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my judgment was severely lacking due to both intoxication and the impulsiveness I was feeling, possibly in attempts to numb the pain of the breakup. I had never had a one-night stand before, and decided to go home with the man I had been chatting and dancing with all evening. We arrived at his residence, and it was uncannily cleany. Think of hospital-level clean, right down to the smell. Without even offering, he pours us each a glass of seemingly expensive red wine. I thought nothing of it at the time, being that he had poured it right in front of me, and drank it eagerly. That is the last memory I have. Prior to waking up in his bedroom, due to the noise of the shower running, I was groggy and dazed when I woke up, but slowly I began recollecting where I was, who I was with. I began to panic when I realized the only article of clothing still left on my body was my bra. I frantically began to search for my cell phone, clothes, and wallet. I rushed out of his bedroom, and my heart dropped. All of his furniture and floors were completely covered with plastic shower curtains, which I distinctly remember not being there prior to me blacking out. Worse yet, all of my personal belongings were placed neatly on his kitchen island, alongside a hammer. My instincts kicked in, and I swiftly grabbed my things and ran out of the door, not even bothering to put my clothes on first. Once I was out of the house, I ran for several minutes in a random direction, panicked and adrenaline-fueled, slipping on my clothing as I ran. Once I finally stopped, I called a cab and went to my apartment, not speaking about this incident to anyone for a long time to come. The detail that still haunts me the most is that the only thing missing of my personal belongings was my ID. What were his intentions? Did he take my ID as some sort of trophy or memento of what he had planned for me that evening? What was put in that wine to sedate me in that way? Looking back on it, I realize I should have contacted the authorities immediately. Perhaps the reason for both, me not speaking up to law enforcement or even informing my close family members and friends about the horrors I witnessed that evening, was because I was and still am highly ashamed of the impulsiveness and naiveness I acted with that night. This eats away at me daily because I believed it is potentially too late for me to report the man, seeing as I do not have the slightest recollection of where his house was located, or his real name. I did try to call the number he was texting me with that night, and it is no longer in service. Also, I am positive that I had my ID in my possession when we left the club. If anyone can give me advice on how or if I can pursue this, I would be forever grateful. It weighs on my conscience to be in constant fear that he has hurt other females prior to and since my encounter. I was not in the right state of mind for not attempting to contact the authorities sooner. Anyways, potential serial rapist murderer? Let's never meet again. I just want to start out by saying that to make this story easier to understand, I'm going to use a lot of dialogue. Obviously, this wasn't recorded, so these aren't the exact words of anyone involved in this experience. I'm just trying to tell it as best as possible, and I think it'll benefit me and you if I use a lot of quotes. Just keep in mind, most of it is not direct. This will be a long one, so let's get into it. This happened in 2015 when I was 16 and still living in my hometown. A forgotten little beach town in the middle of nowhere that's so remote it's probably not even known by surrounding areas. Basically, there's 3 things you can do there as a teenager: go to the movies, swim, or go to this pathetic little place called Miller's Fun Park. It's relatively similar to a lot of fun park type things, only a whole lot worse. There's a crappy arcade with broken skyball mechanics, batting cages that probably haven't been used since the early 80s, a pathetic mini-golf course, and the most dangerous go-karts you've probably ever seen in your life. Seriously. Miller's Fun Park is on the edge of a field. On the opposite side of the field, about 3 miles down, is the beach, and across the single street are woods. If our town is in the middle of nowhere, Miller's is practically on the moon. Anyway, getting into the story. My cousin Emma and I decided one summer night that we wanted to go go-karting. It was around 10 p.m., so we knew it would be almost deserted, but that was the way we liked it. I picked her up from her house and we made the long drive down. Once we had arrived and parked in the nearly empty lot, we hopped out of the car and paid for some go-karting tickets. The same people had worked there forever, I swear to God. There was no one there except for a few boys in the arcade, and a guy who looked to be in his 60s sitting on a bench near the batting cages. Emma and I paid him no mind and went to the go-kart track. Like I said, these karts were incredibly dangerous, so I was focused on nothing but making sure I wasn't going to skid or flip as we raced way too fast around the windy track. This is why I didn't notice the guy walking over to the fence, and why I didn't notice him watching us until we pulled into the lanes after our last lap. He was standing on the other side of the fence, right where I parked. He stared at me with the most unsettling expression, a creepy smile playing on his cracked lips as his dark eyes gleamed. I managed an uneasy smile back. I handed another ticket to the guy running the go-karts, and Emma and I went off again. This time I couldn't focus. The dude gave me the worst type of feeling. My eyes were constantly finding their way to the metal fence where he stood, unmoving and watching us every time we were in his view. And the thing that was bothering me the most was he had only bought 3 tickets. We were on our second to last run, and he was standing directly next to the exit gate. I was just praying he'd move before we were done. But of course, no such luck. Our last go came and went, and I had no choice but to pull in next to him, unbuckle my seatbelt, and get out of my go-kart. I glanced over at Emma a few feet away as I opened the gate to see if she was as scared as I was. But she didn't seem to notice, as she bounced over and bragged about how she had beat me the last 2 times. I was barely listening. I opened the gate, and the guy stepped in front of me just as I was leaving. "Hey there," he said. His voice was dry and he smelled of cigarettes. "What are you cute girls doing all alone here?" My eyes darted over to Emma, who was looking at the dude with both confusion and annoyance. What?" she said. "Yes," I answered quickly. "They're waiting for us, actually. We need to get going." This was a lie and probably sounded like it pushing past the gate, so she stood beside me. I tried to push past him anyway. It didn't work. He grabbed my shoulder to keep me in front of him, and he reminded me of a snake. "I saw you girls pull up alone. Do your parents know you're out?" My heart dropped to my stomach. He had? Are you heading out? Why don't I walk you to your car? He starts inching towards me, and I look to Emma for help. With one swift movement, she pulled me halfway behind her and started sizing the guy up. This was pretty dumb as we were both small, and though she's a few inches taller than me, neither of us are anywhere near his size. The guy clears 6'2" easy, but she doesn't seem to care. Actually, we were just headed to the arcade, she says harshly. Her boyfriend is going to meet us there. I did have a boyfriend at the time, but he wasn't coming. He wasn't even in town. I knew she knew this. This guy's face immediately changes. His smile disappeared, and he was now glaring down at me with a look of annoyance in his eyes. I felt myself start to cower. Boyfriend, he says roughly. Emma didn't give me time to say anything. She grabbed my arm and tugged me behind her into the arcade. The boys from before had already left, and the usual girl who worked in there was nowhere to be found. Still, it felt safer than outside. We ran to the back and hid behind the claw machine. What the hell do we do? I left my phone in my car, I whispered and shouted. There was no way I was going out there alone, and the pothead go-kart guy had already disappeared into the small ticket shack. I don't have mine either. I left it charging, she said, face-palming. We're just going to have to make a run for it. Are you crazy? He's probably waiting for us in the parking lot. What about the guy who runs the go-karts? We could get him to walk us out, she said. I just shook my head. He's as high as Mount Everest right now. I don't want to risk running all the way to the ticket stand for nothing. Then we have no choice. She stood up, pulling me with her. Let's go. I swallowed hard, wanting to cry. I'd never been that scared before. There was something so wrong about the guy. We made our way out of the arcade, looking around to see if he's nearby. The park was now absolutely deserted. Emma practically had dragged me to the exit. I was looking in every direction and every second, waiting for the guy to come out of the woods or something and pounce on us at any second. But he didn't. Everything was still. Get your keys out, Emma instructed, and I pulled them from my pocket. We were about 20 feet from my car when I stopped dead in my tracks. What? She whispered. I stared at the car, keys in hand. I had never locked it. I never locked the car, Emma. What? I didn't lock it. What if... I trailed off, but she knew what I was saying. She started inching towards the car, and I grabbed her arm to stop her, but she pulled away. I'm just going to peek. If I say run, you run. Her voice is quiet. I nodded shakily. She eventually made it close enough to see inside. By the way, she was squatting. I knew it was too dark to make anything out. My heart was beating out of my chest. What if he's in there? What if he jumps out? Or what if we get in and he asphyxiates me like in the movies? All these thoughts almost drown out the unmistakable sound of shoes slamming against the pavement. My head whipped around instantly, and there he was, sprinting at us at full speed out of the woods. I screamed bloody murder and broke for the car, jiggling the handle as I realized I had locked it. Emma was already on the other side, screaming at me to unlock it. I fumbled with the keys but managed not to drop them as I unlocked the door, flung it open, and practically threw myself inside. I had managed to close the door when he was there, slamming his fist against the window and shouting incoherently. I was sobbing at this point and barely managed to lock the doors as he goes for the handle and yanks on it as hard as he can. Emma was screaming at me to go, and through my tears I shoved the key into the ignition and flew it into reverse. He was still chasing us and yelling as I veered backwards out of the lot and turned as fast as I could while slamming on the gas. I was driving like I was still in a go-kart, but I didn't care. I could barely see the road through the flood of tears, and Emma had to grab the wheel several times to keep us from crashing before I regained some composure. Though obviously shaken up, she'd managed to keep her tears in, and be the sane one out of the two of us as we drove at least 30 miles over the speed limit the whole way back to my house. We didn't tell either of our parents about this, and looking back, I wish we had because there was something seriously wrong with that guy. But we were too scared of what they might say or do. I think we thought they'd blame us somehow, so it stayed a secret between us. Something even we didn't talk about until months after the horrifying encounter. Safe to say, we never went back to Miller's Fun Park after that. I urge you all to be extremely careful when going out at night, and to the lunatic who tried to do God knows what to my cousin and I, let's never meet again.